Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a place where the sun never took a day off and neither did people's obsession with looking good while sweating through the apocalypse. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of golden gods, crocodile deities, and flammable wigs. Yep, if you thought your bad hair day was rough, just wait. Picture this, you're walking along the edge of the Nile. The air is thick with the smell of lotus and livestock, and the sun is already cooking the ground beneath your sandals before breakfast. You're shaved bald like most folks because lice are jerks, and hygiene is serious business. But you're also wearing what looks like a small, furry sculpture on your head. It's hot, it's stylish, and it's slowly trying to liquefy down your forehead. Wigs in ancient Egypt weren't just accessories, they were status symbols, spiritual tools, and occasionally survival liabilities. And tonight we're diving into the very strange, sometimes hilarious, sometimes glamorous world of how people try desperately not to melt in public. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing who's tuning in from which corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot through the dirt path toward the market, a linen tunic clinging to your back already damp. The sun's barely up and you can feel it. Your wig, a thick coil of carefully curled black human hair, laced with thread, is already heating like a tiny oven on your scalp. You try not to fidget, no scratching, no slipping. Your mother said touching your wig in public makes you look like a nervous goat. Still, it itches, and it's heavy. But most importantly, it's the law of the land. Not an actual law, but a social one, enforced by raised eyebrows and side eyes sharp enough to cut limestone. In ancient Egypt, hair was about more than looks. Hair, or the illusion of it, was power. Wigs signaled status, cleanliness, and your place in the world. If you were a priest, a merchant, a noblewoman, or even a well-off servant, you probably had one or hoped to. Here's the contradiction: ancient Egyptians shaved their heads constantly. Children, adults, royalty, it didn't matter. Baldness meant you were clean, uninfected, rational, even pious. But instead of staying bald and breezy, they piled on sculpted animal hair hats in 40-degree heat. Why? For starters, the sun. Egyptian sun didn't play nice. It cooked scalps raw, and walking around bareheaded too long could leave you with blisters, sunstroke, or worse, something an ambitious scribe once described as mummification of the brain. Not exactly a medical term, but you get the gist. But it wasn't just practical. Wigs were also about order, what the Egyptians called ma'at. In a world of chaos, hair gave shape, structure. It said, I'm not a wild nomad or a swamp dweller, I'm part of civilization. They also believed hair held energy like an antenna to the divine. That's partly why priests had to shave everything: scalp, face, even body hair. It wasn't just cleanliness, it was about severing ties to the worldly and physical. You put on a wig when stepping into society. You took it off when stepping into the sacred. But don't be fooled into thinking wigs were all business. These things were extra. You had curled wigs, braided wigs, double-layered wigs. Some were scented with incense-soaked fat cones that melted slowly over your scalp. Imagine a perfumed popsicle for your hairline. Others had gold beads, carnelian jewels, even ostrich feathers. Because if your head's going to roast, you might as well look like a fashion god doing it. Some of the earliest wigs date back over 5,000 years. Archaeologists have found examples in tombs, mostly still perched on disintegrated skulls like fancy helmets for the afterlife. And those wigs still partially intact. Ancient Egyptians might not have invented dry shampoo, but they sure knew how to preserve a look. One queen's wig found near Deir el-Bahari had over 300 meticulously woven braids, layered like a honeycomb, with beeswax stiffening the ends. That's right, beeswax. Functional, fragrant, and as we'll get into, occasionally disastrous. By the way, historians still debate whether wigs were ever mandatory in formal court appearances, or whether social pressure just made them feel like it. Some scholars argue that it was more about seasonal choice: lighter, breathable wigs in summer, heavier ones for ceremonies or public events. Others think your public life required a wig unless you were in mourning or under priestly vows. And what about kids? They often wore a side lock of youth, a shaved head with one long curl at the side, kind of like a Nile River rat tail. Weirdly charming, and for fancier kids, you guessed it, Tiny wigs, sometimes made of palm fiber, sometimes of human hair. One child's burial wig was decorated with turquoise beads and tiny falcon feathers, because if you're going to meet Osiris, you better look sharp. Fringe fact for the night, some poor souls actually wore borrowed wigs. That's right, rent a wig, a practice common among servants and low-ranking workers during festivals or ceremonies. Nothing like sharing a headpiece in the heat of July to bond coworkers. So here you are, itching under your carefully balanced mane of flax and imported Nubian curls, navigating a world where appearance is more than vanity, it's identity, it's protection, it's religious code and social currency and literal heat stroke prevention all rolled into one glossy, sticky crown. And just when you think you've had enough, when your scalp screams for freedom and you swear there's a beetle crawling under your wig, remember, it's still better than lice. You're still walking past the fishermen stacking tilapia in woven reed baskets, past the kids chasing each other with sticks that double as toy swords, past a row of market stalls where dates, onions, and prayer amulets hang side by side. And all the while, your head is simmering like a bread oven. You try to ignore it, but the thought keeps creeping back. How did they wear these things all day without turning into puddles? The answer, it turns out, is in the kitchen. Not metaphorically, literally. Because the key to keeping a wig from melting in ancient Egypt was something you'd also find in cooking pots, animal fats, and plant resins, which sounds like a recipe for disaster. And sometimes it was. See, ancient wigs weren't just bundles of hair tied together. They were engineered. Think beeswax as a setting gel, animal fat for gloss, and sometimes even tree resin for hold. They'd work the mixture through the hair strands, twist, braid, and bind them into shape. The result, a style that could withstand wind heat, maybe even a mild sandstorm. But not too much sun. You touch the edge of your wig carefully and feel that faint, waxy resistance. That's not sweat. That's sheep tallow. Or maybe cow. Someone down the production line even used crocodile fat once. That didn't end well. Greasy, scaly, and it attracted flies like an open jar of honey at a picnic. This is where the ingenuity kicks in. To stop their wigs from melting, Egyptians developed a few clever tricks. First up, layering. Most people didn't wear wigs directly on their bare scalps. They'd place a linen cap underneath to soak up sweat and act as a barrier between the hot skin and the wig materials. Kind of like a bald person beanie. Not exactly glamorous, but wildly practical. Then there were cooling salves, homemade pastes smeared onto the scalp before the wig went on. These included things like myrrh, lotus oil, and powdered natron, that salty baking soda-like stuff they also used for mummification. The goal was simple: reduce sweating, keep things dry, and maybe smell halfway decent in a crowd. There's even evidence that some of the fancier wigs were stored in cool clay pots between uses, shaded in cellar-like rooms to keep the fat-based styling agents from melting before they ever made it to your head. Like ancient Tupperware, but for hair pieces. But even with all this prep, wigs did melt. In ceremonies, in the sun, sometimes in the middle of temple processions. And when they did, well, you pretended nothing happened. Egyptian etiquette was very big on pretending. You could have a chunk of beeswax sliding down your temple and still be expected to hold a conversation about grain tax. There's even one wall carving that scholars think might be a visual joke. Two dancers at a feast and one's wig is clearly sliding sideways. Is it a moment of satire, a warning, or maybe just ancient slapstick? Historians still argue whether Egyptians deliberately included these visual gags in art, or if later viewers just see them that way. Speaking of dancers, yes, even they wore wigs. You might think surely if you're twirling in silk and getting cheered on by sweaty nobles, you wouldn't strap a fur hat to your head. But no, dancers and musicians were often hired for royal parties, and their wigs were part of the costume, usually decorated with flowers or ribbon cords designed to bounce dramatically with each move. Did some of them overheat? Absolutely. Did anyone care? Not really. Appearances came first, but the real test came during funerals. Mourning wigs were a thing. They were darker, plainer, and often included veils or trailing pieces of cloth to suggest grief. Wearing one in the mid-afternoon sun while wailing convincingly and flinging sand on yourself was basically an Olympic event in heat tolerance. So how did people not collapse? They sometimes did. Which brings us to another workaround: servants with fans. Yes, that stereotypical image of someone waving a palm frond behind a reclining noble, completely accurate. Except in wig season, the fan bearers had one job: don't let your employer's hairpiece turn into soup. That meant standing nearby, one eye on the back of the head, and adjusting airflow constantly. It was like being a personal AC unit, but unpaid and expected to blend into the background. Another fringe tip from the elite: chilled stones. Some upper-class folks had small flat stones kept in basins of water, then wrapped in linen and pressed to their foreheads before donning the wig. It was a quick blast of coolness, enough to lower body temp for a moment. Historians believe it was mostly symbolic, like taking a deep breath before going into battle, but still it's an impressive bit of self-care. Here's a quirky one: wig frames. Some more advanced wig constructions were mounted on light wooden or reed frames that gave them structure without the need for so much melted fat. Imagine a miniature scaffolding perched on your scalp. Lighter, airier, less risk of melt. These were usually reserved for elite women, particularly in ceremonial contexts. One surviving example had what looked like miniature combs built into the sides. Fashion and function check. But of course, these hacks only went so far. The basic truth remained: if it was noon, and you were in the sun, and your wig was held together with sheep grease, things got messy. And still they kept wearing them. Because appearance order may not remember, it all came back to that. Better to sweat in silence than to appear uncivilized. Fringe tidbit of the night. There are reports, albeit rare, of people actually removing wigs mid-event due to extreme heat. It wasn't done lightly, and it usually came with murmurs of scandal or shame. But if you fainted dramatically enough while clutching your wig, like a fallen crown, society might forgive you. So you keep walking the edge of your linen cap, soaked through the sun, baking the back of your neck. The market is up ahead, and maybe there's a shaded stall with chilled barley water. You tug the wig forward slightly, still in place, still holding shape. For now, you duck under a narrow archway, stepping off the dusty street and into the shade of a courtyard. The sudden shift in temperature is glorious, like diving headfirst into a pot of cool lotus tea. You lean against the stone wall, adjusting your wig slightly, trying not to disturb the fat and wax cocktail gluing it together. You've survived the walk so far, but you know this isn't the end of the battle. Because surprise, you're not just here to wear a wig, you're here to maintain it. And in ancient Egypt, wig maintenance was a full-time job. Let's start with the obvious: hair doesn't clean itself. Neither does sheep fat. So how do you wash a wig that might literally melt under hot water? Very, very carefully. Wigs were luxury items, especially the fancier, more elaborate ones. They didn't belong to your average beer brewer or onion seller. These were investments like cars or phones or designer handbags today. And just like a handbag, if you wanted yours to last through another temple festival, you'd better treat it like royalty. Step 1: storage. When not in use, wigs were carefully placed on carved wooden stands or shaped ceramic forms, often shaped like stylized human heads. This helped preserve their shape and prevented tangles. They weren't tossed into baskets or shoved under beds. No. You gave them space, reverence. Your wig had its own room sometimes, or at least a well-ventilated shelf. Wig oils were also regularly reapplied, usually a thin coating of castor oil or moringa oil rubbed through the strands to keep them supple. And yes, that sounds like your Sunday spa routine, except with more crocodile noises outside. Cleaning was a whole other ordeal. Water and natron were the go-to combo, but only for the linen base or wooden frames, not the fat-coated hair. For the strands themselves, you had to use a dry powder scrub. Think of it as ancient dry shampoo, a mix of powdered clay, crushed lotus petals, maybe a hint of frankincense for scent. You'd rub it gently through the wig, then carefully comb it out with a wooden or bone comb. No tugging, no yanking. One wrong move, and you'd pull the whole thing apart like a flaky pastry. Quirky tidbit. Wealthier Egyptians sometimes paid servants to do this while they were wearing the wig, meaning someone would just stand behind you delicately, scrubbing your scalp in public while you pretended it wasn't weird. Historians still argue whether this was a status flex or just poor time management. Now let's talk about restyling. You didn't just slap the wig on and hope for the best. These were often elaborate pieces with braids, curls, ringlets, or stiff geometric cuts that required upkeep. Some wigs had removable sections like hair clip-ons. You could swap in a fancier braid for special events. Some even had interchangeable ornaments: beads, gold wire, tiny feathers. It's basically ancient modular fashion. You feel the side of your own wig and realize you've lost one of your shell ornaments somewhere back on the road. Not that you're shocked. These things were constantly falling out, which is why wealthier wig owners had spare pieces and entire repair kits. A standard kit might include needles, twine, extra hair, human or horse, and a bit of fresh wax or resin. You know, just in case your scalp decides to disintegrate mid-feast. But wigs didn't last forever. Eventually, the materials would break down. Wax would go rancid, animal fats would attract bugs, and the strands would lose their shine. That's when a decision had to be made: retouch or replace. Most common solution: a partial rebuild. A wig maker. Yes, that was a real job, would take the old base salvage usable strands and build a new structure around them. It's the ancient equivalent of getting your couch reupholstered. If your wig was particularly valuable, say made with imported black Nubian hair or inlaid with lapis lazuli, you might even commission a copy of the original before tossing the old one. In more spiritual cases, especially among priests or royalty, a wig might be buried ceremonially. After all, it had been part of your public identity, and if your belief system involved the afterlife, you didn't want to show up bald on day one of eternity. A shoddy wig might curse you with bad luck or worse, social embarrassment. This also helps explain why archaeologists have found so many wig-related items in tombs, not just wigs, but the stands, the combs, the oils, and sometimes even miniature instructional tablets showing how to tie or arrange certain styles. Picture a 3,000-year-old YouTube tutorial but carved in limestone. And don't forget gender norms. Both men and women wore wigs, but the styles and upkeep routines could be quite different. Men's wigs were typically shorter, boxier, and often more practical. Think business casual. Women's wigs were longer, heavier, and more ornate, frequently braided into rows or fanned out like a papyrus flower in bloom. Some of them weighed over 5 pounds. That's not hair. That's a head workout. There's some debate among scholars whether wigs were used as a status signal or a cleanliness solution. Maybe both. In hot, dusty Egypt, shaving your head was practical. Fewer lice, easier to wash, less overheating, but a bare scalp wasn't fashionable, so you'd shave it, then cover it up with a status symbol wig. Efficiency meets ego, it's a vibe. And here's a weird little nugget: some people wore wigs over their real hair. You'd braid your natural hair tightly against your scalp, almost like a cornrow base, then plop the wig over it. Sounds miserable, right? But it gave the wig more to grip onto and provided extra insulation, good or bad, depending on whether you like stewing in your own humidity. So here you are, in the courtyard, still in one piece. Wig a little lopsided, sure, but no meltdowns, literal or emotional. You glance at the sun as it shifts position, casting long shadows between the columns. It's probably time to reapply that lotus oil. Maybe give the old goat fat glue a little refresh. Because if you think wearing a wig is hard, try keeping it looking flawless while praying, morning dancing, arguing with your in-laws, and dodging accusations of sorcery. Yeah, wigs were work. And you're pulling it off like a seasoned pro. Melting or not, you're back on your feet, navigating the maze of narrow passageways between sandstone buildings, the soft squelch of your sandals echoing against warm stone. The scent of frankincense coils through the air as you pass a merchant peddling tiny vials of scented oil. You pause not because you need more perfume, but because what's inside those bottles might literally hold your wig together. See, in ancient Egypt, scent wasn't just about smelling nice. It was part identity, part protection, part social status, and it played a critical role in keeping those wigs from turning into puddles on your head. Enter the sacred art of perfumed wax cones. You know that weird cone thing you've seen on Egyptian tomb paintings? The one balancing perfectly on top of someone's head like a dollop of creamy dessert? That's not a decorative sundae. That's a scented wax cone, a fragrant chunk of grease designed to slowly melt over the course of the day, releasing pleasant aromas and conveniently helping to set your wig in place. Yes, you walked around in public with a chunk of goo melting on your scalp like some kind of aromatherapy lava lamp. The cones were made from animal fat or beeswax infused with herbs, oils, and powdered resins. Think myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, cedar, and even blue lotus, a flower believed to have mild psychoactive properties. Which means, depending on the mix, you weren't just smelling good, You were possibly a little blissed out too. And here's the kicker: historians still argue whether real people actually wore these cones, or if they were just symbolic depicted only in art. Some believe the cones were spiritual offerings, stand-ins for incense during rituals. Others insist they were totally practical everyday items. In 2019, archaeologists in Amarna even unearthed physical remnants of waxy substances in tombs, suggesting that yes, people really did walk around with melting cones on their heads. You reach up now, feeling your own wig sticky with the early melt of this morning's cone. The scent is still there, a musky blend of sweet and smoky. It's weirdly comforting, like wrapping yourself in a favorite hoodie that also doubles as bug spray. And that's not just a joke. Some of the cone ingredients, especially frankincense and myrrh, had antibacterial and insect-repelling properties. So while the cone made you smell like a temple offering, it also kept flies and lice away. Functional and fashionable. There's also the social angle. A heavily perfumed person was seen as clean, refined, even divine. Perfume was deeply tied to the gods, especially Hathor and Nefertem deities, associated with beauty and fragrance. To smell good was to signal that you were in harmony with the divine order. Bad body odor, on the other hand, that was practically heresy. So naturally, the cones weren't limited to just wigs. People used them while wearing headcloths, braids, or even on bare scalps. Sometimes they'd melt directly into hair, real or fake, giving it a sort of lustrous glaze. That fat also acted as a binding agent for decorative accessories, beads, clasps, and those thin gold wires you keep finding in the market stalls. Want a fringe of beads to dangle perfectly along your hairline? Rub a bit of melted cone fat into the roots. Want your head feathers to stay perky through a desert windstorm? Same trick. The cone wasn't just scent, it was structure. But beware, not all cones were created equal. Wealthier citizens had access to imported oils and exotic spices, making their cones smoother, lighter, and more pleasant smelling. The lower classes, they had to make do with stronger animal fats like goat or ox, which had a more pungent aroma when warmed. Imagine slow-cooking mutton on your scalp. Yeah, glamorous. Of course, there were other wig-preserving methods too. Cloth wrappings soaked in oil were used to secure the wig overnight, keeping it from drying out. These were tied carefully to avoid disturbing the style, almost like a nightcap crossed with a burrito wrap. And if you really wanted to step up your game, you'd hire a perfumer, a professional who specialized in mixing and applying scented materials. These weren't just glorified bath attendants. They were artisans, often working with priests or royalty, who understood the exact ratios of ingredients to achieve different effects. Want to smell seductive for that banquet? There was a cone for that, mourning a dead relative. There was a sad-scented cone too. Seriously. And get this, some perfumers created seasonal blends, lighter scents for summer, richer ones for winter. The ancient Egyptian version of switching from a citrus body spray to a deep, woodsy cologne. One fringe theory even suggests that certain wax cones were laced with mild psychoactive ingredients like blue lotus extract or poppy resin. These wouldn't just smell good, they'd alter your mood. Some scholars think they were used in temple ceremonies to help participants reach a trance state. Others argue they were just glorified incense sticks that accidentally got sniffed too hard. The debate goes on. Either way, cones weren't the only thing melting. You had to be careful about how much extra fat or oil you layered onto your wig. Too much and you'd have a literal puddle sliding down your face by midday. Too little and your strands would go dry and brittle, snapping off like burned noodles. It was a delicate balance, like baking a croissant on your head. As the sun creeps higher, the scent from your own wax cone starts to fade, but the protective residue stays. You feel the solid shape of your wig holding firm, the curls crisp, the braids neat. That wax has worked its magic. You duck back into the alley past a couple of kids pretending to be priests and hear one yell, "You dropped your cone." You don't turn. You know it's not yours. Yours is firmly melting away into the art of illusion, confidence, and just a little bit of grease. You're reclining now well as much as anyone can recline in a stiff linen tunic beneath a narrow awning meant to offer shade. But the sun laughs at shade in Egypt. It scorches everything. And that brings us to an awkward, sticky truth. It's really hard to look fabulous in 105-degree heat, especially when your hair is fake, your cone is melting, and your scalp is basically a clay pot in a kiln. So how did the ancient Egyptians deal with all this sweat, sun, and the relentless possibility of wig melt. Two words: cooling rituals. Let's start with the obvious. Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene, not just in the scrub your face and call it a day way, but in a spiritually significant, culturally embedded, deeply methodical way. Bathing wasn't a luxury, it was a daily event, and it had to happen before anything important. Prayers, meals, even putting on your wig. You rise with the sun, no sleeping in around here, and you're off to your local basin or Nile-fed washroom. There you'd scrub yourself down with a mix of natron, a salty alkaline substance that worked like a natural soap, and a palm full of crushed lotus petals or citrus peels. This didn't just clean your body, it neutralized sweat-removed oil buildup from the scalp and gave your wig a fighting chance of sticking to your skull without slipping down your face like a melting popsicle. Next came oils. Scented or not oils were applied liberally to prevent sunburn, repel insects, and cool the body. You'd rub it all over, including your scalp and the underside of your wig. Sounds slippery. Yes, but remember that wigs had straps, bands, or were pinned in with tiny combs made of ivory or wood. The oil made your scalp supple, not slick. Now here's the fun part. People also used cooling stones in chill jars. Imagine keeping your wig accessories in pottery jars soaked in Nile water left overnight, so they were nice and cool in the morning. Before placing the wig on your head, you might run these jars over your scalp or rest them on the back of your neck like a primitive spa day. And if you were wealthy enough, you'd even have servants fan you with palm fronds while you assembled your ensemble. Still sweaty, of course you are. So let's up the game. Some aristocrats reportedly wore thin cloth pads soaked in cold water, or herbs under their wigs, something akin to an ancient cooling pad. These weren't for the whole day, but just for the stressful moments, like a particularly long ritual, or a public speech, or dinner with your in-laws. And here's a curious fringe theory. Some believe the ancient Egyptians used scented talc-like powders made from crushed alabaster to pat down their scalps before wig placement. Not quite dry shampoo, not quite baby powder, but somewhere in the magical space between. Historians are still debating whether this was everyday practice or just limited to the high priest crowd. But wouldn't you love a chalky pat down before strapping on a sweaty headpiece? Speaking of rituals, cooling and grooming were often tied to spirituality, especially among the priesthood. Before entering a temple, a priest had to bathe multiple times, shave off all body hair, and cool the body with a series of herbal oils. The wig in this context wasn't just fashion, it was part of a spiritual uniform. You were literally cooling your body to prepare your mind. That's right. The ancient Egyptians knew something modern science has confirmed: a cooler body leads to clearer thinking. So all this elaborate wig prep wasn't just for vanity, it was brain maintenance. But wait, weren't wigs hot by default? Yes and no. Surprisingly, Egyptian wigs were relatively breathable, especially those made with woven reed foundations. Hair, real or fake, was stitched into grids that allowed airflow underneath. That, combined with head shaving and the occasional sprinkle of cooling oils, made it tolerable even in the hellish heat of Thebes. Now let's talk about headwear alternatives. When the heat got unbearable, some people opted to leave their wigs at home and just wear linen caps or soft turbans. These were easier to wash, lighter to wear, and still offered some sun protection. And here's the catch: they weren't considered very fashionable. So unless you were working in the fields or doing something that justified going wigless, it could be a social faux pas to show up to a party without your dome decoration. Which leads to one of the oddest social customs you've seen so far: the wig swap trick. Yes, some households kept multiple wigs, even for one person, so you could switch them out throughout the day. Morning temple ceremony, wear your formal, thick-braided number. Midday market stroll, swap it for the lightweight, shorter version. Evening feast, go full volume, maybe even add a gold clasp. Each change meant a re-oiling, a scalp cooling, and the careful reapplication of whatever wax cone or hairpin arrangement was needed. It was exhausting and fabulous. And let's not ignore the male experience. Men, especially noble ones, also wore wigs, but theirs tended to be shorter and more structured, with tight curls or flat layers. Easier to cool, harder to mess up. Still, even their versions had to survive the heat, so they followed many of the same cooling rituals. Some male wigs even had built-in ventilation rows like stylish Swiss cheese. Oh, and one more fringe, literally theory for you. There's talk among a few rogue Egyptologists that wigs were sometimes stored underground in cool cellar-like spaces wrapped in oiled linen until needed. This would have kept them fresh, cool, and free from desert dust. Of course, no one's dug up a confirmed underground wig cellar yet, but one can dream. You wipe your forehead with a linen cloth already yellowed from the day's work. Your wig sits snug, your scalp only mildly swampy, and your cone has melted just enough to leave behind a faint sheen of lotus and cedar. You've survived another round of desert heat, and so has your hair. For now, later that afternoon as you're stepping back into the palace, a breeze cuts across the courtyard. Brief, barely there, but you feel it tickle beneath your wig. That tiny flutter tells you something the structure's still holding. No slippage, no collapsing, just fabulous, fragrant hair defying physics. But that doesn't just happen by accident. Today you're about to meet the unsung heroes of this follicular miracle, the wig makers. Picture this, you're hunched over a narrow bench, your tools laid out with obsessive precision. Bone combs, ivory needles, sinew threads, beeswax blocks. The room smells like cedar oil and sun-dried reeds. You're a professional shemu, that's what ancient Egyptians might have called their wig makers. Not just a barber or stylist. This is full-blown artisan territory. And it wasn't a side gig. Wig makers were a specialized, respected class, particularly in urban areas like Memphis or Thebes. They didn't just clip and glue. They constructed personal sculptures, layered, contoured, and customized for both aesthetics and ventilation. Your client, a high priest wife, who insists on 30 braids each tipped with tiny fan beads. And you're on a deadline. Let's talk materials. The majority of wigs were made from human hair, often donated, traded, or well acquired. Sometimes even from slaves or servants, though historians still argue whether that was widespread or just a rare exception. When human hair wasn't available, they substituted with plant fibers, especially from date palms or reeds boiled and stripped into thin strands. Wealthier clients demanded real hair, only often woven into tightly controlled shapes, elaborate buns, short bobs, layered fringe. The glue-A concoction of resins, tree saps, and animal fat, sometimes thickened with beeswax for durability. A bit funky in scent, but that's where the perfumes came in: frankincense, myrrh, blue lotus. Trust the Egyptians to make you smell like a walking temple. Now here's the wild bit: a top-tier wig could take weeks to complete. That included scalp measurements, strand preparation, fitting sessions, and final trimming. You weren't just strapping a mop on someone's head, you were crafting wearable architecture. Some even had adjustable bands inside for those particularly sweaty days. Early Velcro, not quite, but pretty darn clever. Then there's the internal scaffolding. High-end wigs featured reed lattices or fine linen mesh to give them shape and airflow. The hair was sewn into these grids row by row, then secured with heated beeswax to make it semi-malleable, soft enough to fit snug, stiff enough to hold style. Honestly, it's closer to building a hat than doing hair. And of course, nothing screamed elite louder than accessories. Clients would request inlays of gold wire, turquoise beads, tiny carved amulets, even strings of shells. There are tomb paintings showing wigs so bejeweled they probably doubled as helmets. Not practical in a dust storm, but hey, fashion hurts. Now picture the wig maker on delivery day. You don't just hand over the piece and walk away. You style it on the head, melt in the aroma cone, and do a scalp massage with chilled lotus oil. Why? Because your reputation walks out the door with that wig. If it slides off during a royal banquet, you're going to be known as the wig slipper of Giza for the rest of your career. But here's a juicy tidbit: some wigs had trap compartments. Yes, miniature hidden pockets stitched into the lining. Scholars aren't entirely sure what these were for, but some speculate they held protective amulets, secret messages, or even crushed herbs to ward off lice. It's like your wig was also your locker. Speaking of lice, there's no glamour in head bugs, and they were a problem. Even in the land of regular bathing and natron soap, lice were a daily horror. That's part of why head shaving was so popular. It wasn't just trendy, it was sanitary. And wigs in that context were cleaner than natural hair. You could boil them, sunbake them, or fumigate them with burning herbs. Can you imagine fumigating your hairstyle? Now let's peek behind the temple curtain for a second. In the royal courts, wig makers sometimes doubled as informants. After all, you're leaning in close, chatting with queens and concubines, hearing gossip as you pin in a gold fillet. It's said that some wig artisans were so trusted they were invited into diplomatic meetings not to speak, but to watch, listen, and report. Who'd suspect the guy brushing your bangs? Of course, not all wig makers were elite. In small towns, wig shops were more humble. They doubled as barbershops, gossip centers, and pharmacies. You could get your split ends trimmed, your scalp oiled, and your toothache looked at all under one thatched roof. Budget salons, but with mummification tips thrown in. And just like modern stylists, wig makers had signature looks. You could tell who made what by the braiding style or bead pattern. Some had cult followings. Only Mena does the best side curls. Others were known for volume. She can give you a Nile-sized hairline. Reputation meant everything. By now your head is buzzing not from heat but from sheer admiration. These were not just accessory makers. They were designers, engineers, confidants, and chemists all rolled into one. Their craft helped people survive heat express, status practice religion, and stay clean, all with a splash of dramatic flair. And to think all this, just so your scalp wouldn't look boring. You reach up, gently adjusting your own wig. It's holding firm. Not a single reed out of place. Somewhere out there, your wig maker is smiling and probably charging extra. Now imagine you're sitting at a lavish banquet, the scent of roasted duck and date wine swirling around you. You've survived the day without your wig melting, slipping, or scratching, and honestly, that's more than can be said for the poor scribe across the table who keeps dabbing his bald head with a linen square soaked in vinegar. But as you sip from a cool alabaster cup, you realize wig maintenance doesn't stop once it's on your head. Nope, this is a lifestyle, not a phase. Let's start with storage. You don't just toss your wig onto a stool like it's yesterday's loincloth. Egyptians, ever the meticulous bunch, use custom wig stands, wooden or ceramic heads sculpted to mimic a human skull. Some were even decorated with hieroglyphs or protective symbols to watch over the hair while you slept. Picture a museum-quality mannequin head chilling in the corner of your room, except this one also guards your reputation. And in elite homes, these stands sat in special cosmetic shrines, miniature cabinets stocked with oils, combs, incense pellets, and bits of honeyed resin. Each item had its place. The wig itself might be gently wrapped in linen at night to avoid dust or nosy scarabs. You don't want to find a beetle burrowed into your braids come morning. Here's a weird one. Some people even perfume their storage cabinets. They'd line the inside with strips of cloth soaked in myrrh or blue lotus oil, letting the fragrance subtly seep into the wig. It's like passive aromatherapy for your scalp. Now let's talk washing. Because yes, wigs got bathed, and no, it wasn't optional. Imagine walking through a sandstorm, then dancing at a festival, then sleeping under a reed canopy while crocodiles grunt in the background. That wig filthy. Ancient records and artwork suggest that hot water, natron soap, and fine-tooth combs were the go-to tools for cleaning. The process was slow, careful, and borderline spiritual. Some temples even had dedicated purification chambers for personal items, wigs included. And remember, the glue that wax resin mix didn't just wash off, so wig owners had to be strategic. You didn't soak the whole piece. Instead, you sectioned it out, gently scrubbing the outer layers while keeping the base as dry as possible. It's like dry cleaning a wool coat, high risk, but worth it. But sometimes things went wrong. Imagine this: a noblewoman arrives at a festival, and halfway through the dance of the sun, priestesses, her wig starts sliding. Not melting, sliding, because her scalp oil broke down the beeswax bond. Embarrassing, sure. Dangerous only if the pharaoh's watching. This is why many elite women employed personal wig attendants, servants trained specifically in upkeep, reattachment, and emergency restyling. It's the ancient version of having your own glam squad on standby. And here comes the quirky part: some people owned multiple wigs for different occasions. Everyday wig, short, practical, maybe a linen cap underneath. Temple wig, sleek, straight, reserved for rituals. Party wig, huge, curly, absolutely dripping in lapis lazuli beads. You could even say, hold on, let me change into my evening hair, and no one would blink. Now brace yourself for one of the most debated topics in the scholarly world. Did Egyptians ever sleep in their wigs? Historians still argue whether anyone did this out of laziness, spiritual belief, or pure vanity. Some claim elite individuals, especially royalty, slept in specialized night wigs, softer and more flexible, lined with linen and perfumed to encourage dreams of the afterlife. Others insist this would have been ridiculous, uncomfortable, and ultimately sweaty. Honestly, you try sleeping in a braided helmet and let us know how it goes. Let's not forget about the role of servants and slaves in all this. Wig maintenance wasn't just a personal chore, it was often delegated. There were specialized grooming servants whose daily tasks included brushing, oiling, and checking for pests. Some even had song chants to accompany their combing sessions. Not for fun, for rhythm. They'd hum a pattern to pace their brushing, ensuring no hair got yanked or torn. It's kind of adorable until you realize those same servants had to boil lice-infested wigs during sand flea season. And for the ultra-wealthy monthly refurbishing sessions, think of it as a spa day for your scalp. The wig would be removed, steamed, detangled, rescented, and rewoven in spots where the strands had thinned. Want an extra curl, a new bead pattern, maybe a divine inscription stitched into the lining for extra luck? No problem, just don't forget to tip your artisan with wine or a nice goatskin. Here's a little nugget from the tomb of a Theban noble archaeologist. Found a sealed box containing 3 wigs, 2 oil jars, a carved ivory comb, and a mirror polished so sharply you could signal a barge with it. It's believed this was his personal grooming kit buried with him to ensure he stayed fresh-faced and fabulous in the afterlife. Eternal rest, more like eternal style. And don't even get us started on children's wigs. Yep, even the littlest Egyptians had their own sets, often stylized with playful braids or charms for protection. A child might wear a wig to formal events, religious ceremonies, or funerals. One tomb painting even shows a young girl having her wig brushed by a servant while holding a toy hippo. Practical and adorable. So tonight, as you peel your own scalp away from the invisible pressures of the day, no wax, no glue, no reed scaffold. Just think about those ancient folks delicately combing their second scalps by oil lamp. A civilization built not just on pyramids and papyrus, but on the firm belief that great hair matters. Your wig, it's a symbol of beauty, hygiene, prestige, and let's be honest, of sheer ancient ingenuity. You're up early today, sunlight just barely poking over the limestone horizon. There's still dew on the lotus leaves, and already you can hear merchants calling out their wares across the Nile. As you reach for your morning oil and gaze at your meticulously stored wig, you realize this isn't just personal grooming, it's performance. And now it's time to face your greatest challenge yet, putting the wig back on without looking like a sleep-deprived tomb robber. Let's start with the prep. First, you take a damp linen cloth and gently wipe your scalp. A mixture of overnight sweat dust and residual oils needs to go. Next comes the re-oiling. Just a few drops of moringa or castor oil massaged in with your fingertips, keeping the scalp smooth and moisturized. If you skip this step, good luck peeling the wig off your skin tonight. You'll be removing it with half your patience and maybe a layer of dignity. Then comes powdering. Oh yes, ancient Egyptians loved their powders. Crushed limestone, fine ash, or even ground barley was lightly dabbed over the scalp to create a dry, matte base for adhesion. Think of it as their version of setting powder, only with more grit and fewer beauty influencers. Once your head is prepped, it's time for the real magic adhesive application. Depending on your social status and how long you intend to keep the wig on, you might choose between several options. Beeswax blends for short outings, tree resin or bitumen for long-term wear. Some elite individuals even used layered methods where the inner rim of the wig was padded with softened wax, while the crown was stabilized using pins or discreet ties. Secure but not medieval torture device, tight. Here's the quirky bit: in some tomb art, you can spot what looks like wig assistants blowing on the glue to help it set faster. It's basically the ancient version of waiting for your eyelash glue to get tacky, minus the TikTok hacks. And finally, it's showtime. You position the wig over your crown, adjusting carefully. Some had woven bands or head loops to anchor them. Others had a clever system of braid hooks, tiny stitch loops that latched onto shaved patterns or existing braids underneath. A bit like ancient Velcro, but with more hair and fewer factory recalls. Now that it's on, it's not just a look, it's a statement. Maybe you're heading to court where the curls must be symmetrical, scented, and slightly rigid. Think legal chic. Or perhaps you're going to a harvest festival where looser, perfumed waves signal ease and fertility. Your wig isn't just a hairstyle, it's social code. Historians still argue whether wigs were required for certain public appearances, especially in temples or under royal summons. Some believe head coverings, whether wigs or linen caps, were mandatory for purity. Others argue it was more fluid based on climate context and personal vanity. But what's clear is that not wearing a wig when expected social suicide. Now let's zoom in on cosmetic layering. Once the wig is on, you're not done yet. Oh no. You reach for your eyeliner palette, ground galena, for black coal, maybe malachite, for green shadow. A little eye definition beneath those thick wig bangs really makes your expression pop, especially in the torchlight. And don't forget the scenting ritual. Yes, the wig might still carry a trace of last night's lotus oil, but if you're really aiming to impress, you place a perfume wax cone, a small cone of scented fat on top of your head, or stitched into the crown of the wig itself. As it slowly melts throughout the day, it releases calming, luxurious scents like myrrh cinnamon or blue lotus. It's like walking around in your own personal incense cloud. Unless, of course, it drips into your eye. Then it's more like a scented slap. This is where fashion and function collide. Because while you're turning heads with your shiny locks and your softly dripping aromadome, your wig is also protecting you. From the sun, yes. From bugs often. From sweat stains. Let's not push it. But here's the kicker, not everyone in society went through this full routine. Priests, for example, often remained shaved and wigless during service. It was a matter of ritual cleanliness, and many temples prohibited hair, real or fake, during sacred ceremonies. Even the gods in many depictions are shown with stylized but symbolic wigs, not the intricate braided pieces you might wear in the street. Still, you'd better believe that after temple hours, those priests slipped into something more luxurious for dinner parties. And by something, we mean enormous curly wigs stacked higher than a falcon in flight. And then there's the military class. Soldiers and guards often opted for shorter, tightly bound wigs, better for combat and less likely to snag on spears. These weren't always decorative, more often they were practical. Reinforced at the base, designed to absorb sweat, almost helmet-like. Some scholars believe they even stitched amulets into the linings for battlefield protection. Imagine charging into a skirmish with a tiny scarab charm sewn into your sideburns. Ancient Egypt didn't play. By this point, you're dressed, painted, perfumed, and fully wigged, ready to face the gods, the taxes, the gossip. Just be careful when leaning too close to any open flame. Beeswax has its limits. And you know what's fascinating? Some evidence suggests that Egyptians may have had a wig etiquette, a kind of silent language of styles, lengths, and partings. A forward braid implied wealth. A center part suggested youth. Even the choice of hair color, coal black versus sun-touched brown, carried social weight. And yes, some nobles even dyed their wigs, soaking them in henna or saffron infusions to shift the tones. You pause by a polished bronze mirror. Adjust a strand. Add a tiny lapis pin. You've nailed it. And just like that, you step out into the buzz of the morning, your entire identity balanced on your scalp, shimmering in the early light. You're walking through the market now, head high, wig steady. You catch reflections in pottery stalls and bronze mirrors, and yep, still flawless. But here's the secret. Nobody talks about that gorgeous hairpiece you're flaunting. It's not yours, not even close. Let's pull back the curtain on the human hair trade in ancient Egypt. Much of what went into those lustrous wigs came not from local heads, but from far-off places through networks that spanned desert seas and class divides. The elite wanted long, thick, dark hair, and sometimes theirs just wouldn't cut it. So what do you do when your own strands are fine, brittle, or frankly gone? You import. Hair arrived by boat, by caravan, and possibly even as part of tribute or conquest spoils. Some records hint at hair coming in from Nubia, Canaan, or even farther afield. Long, smooth locks were seen as exotic and luxurious, especially if they came from foreign women. It wasn't just about fashion, it was about status through scarcity. There are tomb fragments where a woman is depicted gently stroking another's long hair, captioned with words like, "beloved tresses" or "hair like night." That's not poetry, it's sales copy. These wigs were a commodity, and like any luxury good, the more difficult they were to obtain, the more desirable they became. Now here's a weird twist. Some wigs combine human and plant fibers. Historians still argue whether this was out of necessity, aesthetic choice, or symbolism. Papyrus, linen threads, and palm fibers were all occasionally woven into the base to add structure or fill volume. It's like the ancient version of clip-ins, just less seamless and probably way itchier. Imagine the experience. You sit down in a hot little workshop, tucked between a goldsmith and a scroll vendor. The wig maker, likely an older woman with half a dozen needles tucked into her belt, pulls out a tray of hair bundles, dyed sorted, and ready to be braided. You point to one that catches the light just right. "It's from Byblos," she says proudly. "Smuggled past the sea peoples. Very rare. Sold to West somebody at the time." But not all wigs were made from premium imports. Some were recycled, taken from corpses, or even cut from servants and slaves. There's evidence that in times of famine or poverty, women would sell their hair for food. If you've ever watched your favorite stylist snip a bit too much, imagine them doing it with a bronze blade and absolutely no mirror. And while we're on the subject of wig makers, they weren't just barbers or beauticians, they were artisans. High-ranking ones too. A good wig maker could make or break your social image. Their tools were specialized combs carved from ivory bronze razors, polished obsidian blades for delicate trimming. Their storage rooms were full of oils, resins, ribbons, and tight wooden heads used for shaping the base of each wig. These were passed down like family heirlooms. Fun tidbit, some wig makers signed their work, tiny cartouches burned or etched into the wooden cap lining. It's the ancient Egyptian version of a designer tag. Imagine rocking a House of Nebet original and flaunting it at the pharaoh's banquet. Here's where it gets a bit academic. Historians still debate whether wigs were seen purely as fashion or if they carried spiritual or magical connotations. Some argue they were used in rituals to transform the wearer literally and symbolically. After all, priests donned specific headdresses during ceremonies, and the gods themselves were almost always depicted in idealized wigs. Was the wig a tool for accessing divine energy, or was it just the ultimate glow-up? Now picture yourself in a noble household. A maid arrives holding a wig carefully wrapped in linen. You unwrap it, revealing a deep black waterfall of curls scented with cedar and cinnamon. You recognize the shape. It's the mourning style worn during funerals and days of remembrance. Yes, wigs had types for specific occasions. Some styles, tight braids pinned high, were for feasting and dancing. Others, long, heavy falls, signaled grief, humility, or meditation. Wearing the wrong one, a social blunder big enough to start a family feud. Wigs were like mood rings with better hair days. You notice a small hairpin embedded near the temple. It's shaped like a falcon. It's not just decorative, it's a protective amulet. Woven into the wig, it's meant to shield you from bad omens, gossip, or that jealous cousin who wants your inheritance. Egyptians weren't just stylish, they were superstitious with flair. But we're not done with class dynamics yet. Let's swing by a working-class neighborhood. Not everyone could afford full wigs. Many used half wigs or false pieces that attached at the crown or back of the head, blending with their own hair. Others used simple cloth caps with attached braids. And here's a delightfully human detail: some children were given starter wigs, smaller and lighter, so they could practice wearing them for longer occasions. You can almost imagine a kid tugging at their itchy linen cap, trying to yank it off during a temple procession, while their mother hisses, "Leave it, we paid good grain for that." There's one more layer here: gender fluidity. Wigs were worn by men, women, and possibly those who moved between roles. Some styles blurred lines, androgynous by today's standards, but totally normalized in temples or palaces. The wig was less about who you were and more about what you represented: power, decorum, beauty, and mystery. So here you are, seated among friends at an evening banquet. Music plays. Someone comments on your wig, how it shimmers in the torchlight, how it carries that faint scent of sweet myrrh. You smile casually, adjusting the side braid, and say, "Oh, it's Nubian, hand-stitched. And I hear it might be cursed." Everyone laughs, but nobody's sure you're joking. You wake up to another blazing sun, but this time it's not the heat that threatens your wig's integrity, it's the sand. Yes, the ever-present desert dust that settles like a sneaky thief in every nook and cranny, especially in your hairpiece. You brush the coarse grains from your brow, realizing that keeping a wig pristine was a constant battle against nature's harshness. To combat this, the Egyptians developed an arsenal of ancient cleaning rituals that seem surprisingly familiar. You think of shampoo and conditioner, well, sort of. The primary cleaning agents were mixtures made from plant ashes, natron, and even fermented salts. These concoctions didn't just clean, they also had the magical role of purifying and protecting the wig's fibers. You learn that wig cleaning was no simple wash and rinse affair. It involved a multi-step process often overseen by specialized servants or the wig maker themselves. First came the gentle brushing with soft palm fiber combs to loosen debris. Then the wig was soaked in water infused with crushed lotus petals and frankincense resin, both prized for their fragrance and antiseptic qualities. But here's the kicker: frequent washing was actually avoided. Why? Because water could weaken the natural adhesives and stitching holding the wig together. So instead, they relied heavily on powdered herbs and oils sprinkled lightly to absorb oils and sweat without saturating the delicate hair. And speaking of oils, imagine the scent of your wig after a good rub down with cedar wood and myrrh oil, which doubled as insect repellents. Yes, bugs loved wigs as much as people did. The dreaded lice and mites were the real enemies behind the scenes, and treatments were often as much about pest control as hygiene. In fact, some wig wearers carried small pouches filled with dried wormwood or garlic cloves tucked inside their cap's ancient bug spray. You might chuckle now, but historians still argue whether some of these pungent herbs were used solely for practical reasons or if their aromas were believed to ward off evil spirits as well. Back in your quarters, a servant delicately lays your wig on a wooden frame carved in the shape of a human head, often gilded or painted. This practice not only helped maintain the wig's form, but allowed for airing out between wears. You can almost hear the subtle creak of wood and the faint scent of beeswax from the polishing ritual. The drying ritual was sacred. Wig makers would place wigs near the hearth's embers, ensuring just the right balance of warmth to dry without warping the fibers. Too hot and the delicate stitching could melt or shrink. Too cold and the wig might develop mildew or stiffness. Now let's talk about wig storage. You might imagine they just tossed them in boxes, but no. Wigs were stored in ornate wooden chests lined with fine linen and cedar shavings to preserve scent and deter pests. Some chests bore inscriptions or blessings for the wig's longevity. But here's a quirky tidbit: some wealthy Egyptians owned multiple wigs for different moods and events, rotating them like a modern-day shoe collection. A lighter, shorter wig for the daytime heat, a more elaborate, longer one for festivals or rituals. Even specialty wigs dyed with henna or saffron for special occasions. And when a wig finally reached its end, it wasn't simply thrown away. Evidence suggests some wigs were ritually burned or buried in tombs, perhaps, to accompany their owners into the afterlife. Some scholars propose that this was a symbolic shedding of identity and a purification of the soul. But historians still debate if this was widespread or reserved only for elites. One last surprising detail: during intense summers, some Egyptians took to lightly wetting their wigs or wrapping them in damp linen cloths to cool the scalp underneath. It's the ancient equivalent of your modern-day cooling towel, though probably less comfortable with all the oils and powders involved. So as you pat your hairpiece dry and prepare for another scorching day, you realize that every strand, every stitch, and every scent is part of a centuries-old dance between beauty practicality and a bit of magic. You step outside again, this time toward the royal courts, where wigs weren't just everyday wear. They were statements of power, wealth, and identity. The kings and queens of ancient Egypt didn't just wear wigs. They adorned themselves with elaborate headdresses built atop their wigs, encrusted with gold precious stones and intricate beadwork. The craftsmanship behind these regal pieces is staggering, and as you watch the court wig makers at work, you begin to appreciate the artistry and the precarious balancing act that went into maintaining such grandeur. Your guide tells you about the special adhesives used to fix wigs, securely made from natural resins mixed with animal glues. These sticky mixtures had to be applied with precision. Too much and the wearer's scalp might suffer irritation; too little and the wig could slip off mid-ceremony. Imagine the embarrassment. You picture a pharaoh, frozen mid-speech, desperately clutching at a wayward wig. Historians still argue whether these adhesives were purely functional or also carried symbolic meaning, binding the wearer to divine authority. The king's wig, often a Neme's headdress, featured broad striped fabric that fell around the shoulders, but underneath was a carefully fitted wig base. These bases, crafted from linen and palm fibers, acted as a frame to support the wig's weight and allowed airflow to prevent overheating, because no one wanted a sweaty pharaoh. The royal wig was often dyed jet black with henna or charcoal, enhancing its sheen and status. You get to see the wig makers mixing colors from crushed minerals and plant dyes, applying them in layers to achieve the glossy black that symbolized vitality and youth. There's a hint of irony here. Given the desert sun and heat, the black wigs must have absorbed more heat, yet they remained a fashion must-have. The Egyptians believed black was not just a color, but a magical shield, a connection to the fertile Nile soil and the god Osiris. Now, the fringe details, some wig styles included braided sections adorned with gold threads and beads, each braid telling a story or signifying rank. You notice that the court's wigs aren't just about aesthetics. They're complex social signals. The length, style, and accessories communicated everything from marital status to political allegiance. Wig care in the palace was a full-time job. You observe a team of servants dedicated solely to maintaining the royal wigs. They use soft brushes made from ibis feathers and tools fashioned from bone to gently untangle the wigs without damaging the fibers. The wig master demonstrates a ritual where the wig is carefully lifted and air dusted with fine powders made from crushed flowers and incense ash, both to refresh the scent and absorb oils. The smell in the wig chambers is intoxicating, hints of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus layered with the faint musk of human hair and wax. It's a scent designed to impress, disarm, and command respect. You learn that scent played an important role not only in personal grooming, but in spiritual protection. A fragranced wig was thought to ward off evil spirits or curses. Interestingly, some fringe scholars propose that certain wig styles and decorations might have served a shamanistic or ritualistic purpose, linking the wearer to divine forces or ancestral spirits. Though mainstream historians debate this, the possibility adds an enigmatic layer to what might otherwise seem like mere fashion. You watch a royal official adjusting a ceremonial wig for an upcoming festival. It's heavy, intricate, and incredibly delicate. The tension between beauty and fragility is palpable. One wrong move, and the whole structure could collapse, an apt metaphor for power itself. Before leaving the palace, you glimpse a hidden corner where discarded wigs lie folded, faded, and waiting for their final fate. The reverence for wigs doesn't end with wear. Their afterlife remains part of the mystery. As you step back into the dusty streets, you realize that ancient Egyptian wigs were far more than cosmetic. They were woven with culture, belief, and identity, delicate threads tying the wearer to God's history and society itself. You follow the sun's path down to the bustling workshops at the city's edge, where wig makers, craftsmen, and artisans alike busily prepare for the demands of the day. The smell of resin, crushed pigments, and sometimes a faint whiff of burnt hair fills the air, mixing oddly with the scent of nearby bakeries and livestock. Here you witness the painstaking process of wig construction, a meticulous craft that has been passed down through generations. The first step you observe is hair collection and preparation, a task requiring patience and skill. Most wigs were made from human hair sourced from temple offerings, prisoners, or willing donors, but animal hair like goat or sheep was occasionally mixed in for texture and volume. The hair was carefully washed in water infused with natron salts and scented oils to cleanse and soften it. You note how the artisans comb through the strands, separating the good from the brittle. Your guide mentions a quirky fact. Some wig makers believed that hair gathered from temples held spiritual power, making wigs crafted from such hair not just decorative but protective talismans. While mainstream historians remain skeptical, it's a fascinating theory blending craft with ancient mysticism. Next, the artisans dye the hair using natural pigments, black from soot or henna, reddish hues from madder root, and golden highlights from saffron or chamomile. The colors are mixed with fragrant oils, think cedarwood and juniper, to add luster and a pleasing scent. The result is wigs that don't just look striking, but smell subtly divine. You watch as the hair is carefully sewn onto a base of woven linen netting, shaped to fit the wearer's head. This base provides structure and breathability. The stitching is precise and tight, ensuring the wig will withstand heat and activity without slipping or unraveling. An interesting scholarly debate centers on whether wigs were worn more for comfort or status. Some argue that the elaborate construction made them quite heavy and hot, suggesting they were reserved for special occasions, while others believe daily wear was common among the upper classes. Your eyes catch a worker carefully braiding a long wig, twisting in thin gold threads, and tiny beads made of faience-glazed ceramic beads that shimmer with a turquoise glow. This ornamentation wasn't just decorative, but a signal of wealth and favor worn by priests and nobles alike. Occasionally, the artisans brushed powdered incense into the wigs, believing it helped preserve the hair and keep away lice and other pests, an ancient form of pest control that blends practicality with ritual. As the afternoon light softens, you see workers laying finished wigs on racks, their curls and waves perfectly formed ready for transport to temples, palaces, or wealthy homes. You imagine the pride and anxiety of those who will wear them, knowing the wig was more than a fashion statement. It was a symbol of identity and power. Among the craftsmen, you notice a few apprentices practicing the delicate art of trimming and shaping wig edges with tiny bronze scissors. The precision needed here is staggering. One slip, and the whole style could be ruined, a fact that makes you sympathize with these young artisans nervously mastering their craft. As you prepare to leave, your guide shares a last intriguing detail. Some ancient texts hint at special wig treatments involving ashes from sacred fires mixed with oils, possibly to strengthen fibers or imbue the wigs with spiritual protection, though historians still debate the truth of these claims. Walking away, you realize the wig makers were not mere hairdressers. They were keepers of tradition, artisans of identity, and guardians of ancient secrets woven strand by strand. The evening draws near as you return to the quiet of the household, the sun dipping low and painting the sky with soft apricot and lavender hues. Inside, the air smells faintly of lotus and frankincense, a comforting mix that immediately settles your mind. Your task now shifts to the delicate care and storage of these prized wigs, a final crucial step in the ancient ritual of wig maintenance that you hadn't fully appreciated before. You watch as the wig is gently removed from its resting place on a wooden stand, revealing the intricate curls and braids you saw crafted earlier. The artisan handling it treats the piece like a rare relic, using soft linen cloths to dust away any lingering particles. You learn that wigs were not simply worn and discarded. They were treasured possessions, often carefully preserved for years, even decades, with dedicated storage methods designed to protect them from the harsh Egyptian climate. One curious fact surfaces as you observe some wealthy wig owners kept their wigs in cedarwood boxes, lined with fragrant herbs like rosemary, in time not just for preservation, but to keep the scent fresh and to repel insects, a natural air freshener of sorts. You can almost imagine the faint herbal aroma wafting from these boxes whenever they were opened. Historians still argue whether these preservation techniques were widespread or limited to the elite, but evidence from burial sites hints that some wigs were indeed stored alongside their owners, suggesting a belief in their importance beyond mere appearance. The artisan then applies a subtle mix of oils to the wig's sandalwood myrrh and a hint of cinnamon to maintain softness and gloss. This treatment also served a practical purpose. It helped prevent the wig fibers from drying out and becoming brittle in the desert heat. You recall the earlier discussion about ashes and wonder how many of these treatments were passed down through oral tradition versus written records. You see the wig gently wrapped in fine linen, almost like a newborn child being swaddled, then placed in a cushioned basket, lined with more fragrant herbs and sealed with a thin sheet of beeswax to keep out dust and moisture. The care and reverence given to these objects astound you. It's as if the wig is a living thing deserving of respect and protection. While handling the wig, the artisan mentions an odd but charming tradition. Some wigs were sprinkled lightly with crushed dried flowers before a festival or ceremony, a fragrant ritual believed to bring good fortune and ward off evil spirits. You smile, imagining ancient Egyptians sniffing their wigs like bouquets before important events. Later, as twilight deepens, you glimpse the family's children playing nearby, their bare heads, a sharp contrast to the elaborate wigs you've spent the day with. It's a reminder that these objects were markers of class and age, symbols, worn with care rather than simple fashion accessories. You consider how the practice of wig maintenance mirrors the Egyptians' broader relationship with beauty, spirituality, and social order, an intertwined dance of ritual and reality. It's clear that keeping a wig from melting or falling apart required more than just skill. It demanded patience, respect, and a deep understanding of nature's forces. Before you leave, the artisan shares one last thought. There's ongoing debate among scholars about how much wig care was influenced by religious beliefs versus practical necessity, but you're left with a sense of awe at the way these ancient people intertwined both seamlessly. The day's lessons settle softly over you, like the faint scent of myrrh on a summer breeze. As you prepare to rest, knowing that the wig's stories are far from over, they continue to whisper secrets through time. Night deepens and the household settles into quiet rhythm. Shadows lengthen and flicker by torchlight, casting a warm glow on carved wooden chests and painted walls. But your work isn't done yet. Now comes the mysterious part: how ancient Egyptians ensured their precious wigs didn't simply melt or lose shape in the unforgiving desert heat, especially during grand ceremonies or long summer days. You watch as the master wig maker retrieves a slender jar filled with a thick golden substance, a resinous balm made from natural tree sap beeswax and rare fragrant oils like cedar and frankincense. This, you learn, was the secret weapon against the relentless sun and sweat. The balm was carefully warmed over a small flame, then skillfully rubbed into the wig's fibers. It formed an invisible shield, waterproof and flexible, preserving the curls and braids from collapsing or becoming greasy. Historians still argue whether the recipe for this balm was a closely guarded secret among elite craftsmen or common knowledge passed through generations of hairdressers, but evidence from papyri and wall paintings suggests that the art was highly specialized and respected. You notice how the balm also imparted a faint golden sheen to the wig, which not only enhanced its beauty, but symbolized divine favor, shimmering like the rays of the sun, God Ra himself. It's a clever blend of utility and spirituality, reinforcing the wearer's status and protection in a world ruled by both earthly and cosmic forces. Then the wig is placed on a low wooden rack beside an earthenware bowl filled with cool water scented with lotus petals and crushed mint leaves. This water bath wasn't for soaking, but for gentle misting, a technique used to cool the wig during hot afternoons and keep the fibers supple. The misting ritual was performed carefully, sometimes by assistants wearing linen tunics, dyed indigo or saffron, their hands soft but practiced. You recall a fringe theory suggesting that some wig care rituals may have been influenced by early alchemical practices, using the balm as a symbolic elixir of preservation, meant to defy time itself, blurring the lines between cosmetic art and proto-science. As you follow these rituals, you notice how every action balm application, misting, gentle combing with wooden picks, is performed with deliberate, calm, almost meditative focus. It's a ritual in itself, a sacred dance between human and nature, preserving beauty amid inevitable decay. The wig maker also shares a quirky tidbit during particularly hot festivals. Some wigs were cooled further by placing small pouches of crushed ice wrapped in linen inside the headdress, an ancient precursor to our modern cooling packs, although the ice was rare and precious, reserved for the wealthiest few. The day's final task is to secure the wig onto a stand carved from acacia wood, placed inside a special box lined with scented papyrus leaves. This box was then stored in a cool, shaded chamber with latticed windows, allowing gentle breezes to flow, a perfect environment to protect the wig until it was needed again. As you close the box, you feel a new appreciation for the blend of art, science, and belief that went into preserving these magnificent wigs. They weren't just adornments. They were living symbols of status, identity, and divine favor, cared for with the same devotion one might reserve for a sacred relic. The night winds whisper through the courtyard, carrying faint scents of myrrh and cedar, mingling with the cool desert air, as you prepare to leave the workshop behind, your mind buzzing with the stories these wigs tell about ancient lives, their hopes, and their ingenious ways to defy time. The sun has finally set, leaving the sky painted in deep indigos and soft purples, a perfect backdrop to wind down the day. As you gather your thoughts, the rhythmic sounds of distant night creatures and the gentle rustle of palm fronds sway your mind toward calm. You realize the story of ancient Egyptian wigs, those delicate, fragrant crowns of power, is really a story about patience, care, and the timeless human desire to preserve beauty and identity against the odds. You remember how the wig maker's daily rituals blended the practical and the mystical, mixing natural ingredients like beeswax and tree resin with scented oils, cooling mist, and even ice wrapped in linen for the privileged few. These wigs weren't just fashion statements. They were symbols of divine protection, social rank, and spiritual connection, carefully maintained with reverence. Historians still debate whether these techniques were purely cosmetic or had deeper magical significance. But what stands out is the dedication and artistry that went into every step, from weaving to waxing, from misting to storage. These practices created a bridge between the earthly and the divine, between fleeting beauty and lasting legacy. And here you are, a humble apprentice in that long chain of caretakers, learning that even something as seemingly frivolous as a wig holds layers of meaning and history, whispers of ancient lives and beliefs. Maybe next time you put on your own hat or hairstyle, You'll think about the centuries of wisdom tucked beneath those braids and curls. So as you prepare to close your eyes, imagine the soft shimmer of those golden balms, the gentle touch of cool mist, and the warm scent of cedar and myrrh drifting on a desert breeze. The ancient Egyptians might have believed these wigs could protect them, not just from the sun, but from time itself. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Rest easy knowing you've touched a fragment of a world long past where beauty ritual and resilience were woven together like the finest strands of hair. Sleep well.